Hello viewers, before the video gets started I'd just like to let you know that this is going to be one of those informal discussion videos where I just talk about a subject with some totally relevant gameplay in the background. If you want to know why I do these types of videos opposed to scripted video essays, I'll talk about that at the end of the video. For now, I want to talk about the X-Men franchise, more specifically, the timeline, the sequence of most significant events. And this will make more sense later on, but let's just quickly cover all the most important events in the X-Men canon. So, for the purpose of this video, the X-Men timeline starts with Xavier starting the X-Men with Eric's help. Then comes the Cuban Missile Crisis and Charles loses his legs from a stray bullet. Then Logan volunteers for Weapon X. He then gets shot with an adamantium bullet which causes him amnesia, 10 years, maybe 2 decades later, Rogue stumbles upon Logan at a bar, Cyclops and Storm introduce Logan to the X-Men, Wolverine joins the mission to the Statue of Liberty, Jean dies, Dark Phoenix rises, Cyclops dies, Xavier dies, and Logan is forced to kill Jean. Then, in a post-credit scene, we see that Xavier transfers his consciousness into his twin's body. Logan spends who knows how long in the wilderness on his own until he gets asked to help save an ex-Japanese soldier's life again. The soldier betrays Logan and tries to steal his healing factor. Logan survives this whole ordeal and meets new Xavier and Magneto at an airport. Over the course of the next 2 decades or so, Sentinels kill most of the mutants on the planet till only a few X-Men are left. Then Kitty Pryde sends Logan's consciousness back in time to stop Mystique from killing Tyrion, thus avoiding the terrible future where all the mutants die and the Sentinels rule. Now, I don't know about you, but I consider these events to be significant and in some cases even franchise-defining. These events took place over the course of 14 years and 7 movies and literally shaped the X-Men franchise into what we know it as. Or rather, knew it as. I use the past tense there because in Days of Future Past, Logan succeeds in stopping Mystique from killing Tyrion, effectively changing the future. As in, changing all the events that follow from that time period. Meaning that almost every significant plot point I listed earlier is now irrelevant, because as far as we know, none of it happened. Aside from Charles forming the X-Men, losing his ability to walk, and Logan volunteering for Weapon X. Seriously, think about the events I went over. Rogue meeting Logan at a bar, Cyclops dying, and Jean going evil either didn't happen or might not have happened at all because of one movie. Days of Future Past retroactively changed the X-Men continuity, meaning that every movie that follows Days of Future Past in canon is no longer canon. First Class is still canon because it happened before Days of Future Past, but all the work that the franchise put into building up the X-Men's world and characters has been undone. And maybe you didn't like the way the franchise was going. I mean, pretty much nobody liked X-Men 3, so it's understandable if you're glad it's no longer canon, but the point is that this sets a precedent for any and all franchises to follow. Think about this from a studio's point of view. Imagine the execs sitting around a table talking about how the X-Men franchise is hemorrhaging money, and so they feel the best course of action would be to undo everything the franchise has done so far so that they can do it over, guaranteeing them more content for fans and therefore more money. That's pretty much what they did. Now, I have no idea what the studio actually thought about Days of Future Past resetting the timeline. I have no idea whether it was done out of studio interference or creative necessity, but the point is that it happened and now exists as an example of what a franchise can do when it's not happy with any of its entries. A studio could decide 5, 10, or even 100 movies into a franchise to travel back in time and change one event that could make all previous entries in that franchise completely meaningless. To be fair, they could also choose to change totally trivial events or write the time travel as a genuine plot point rather than a retcon. But my point is that it's kind of alarming that this could happen at all. A director or a studio could be unhappy with any of their properties and just use time travel to undo anything they want. And there's a totally valid argument to be made that that effectively wastes all the time and effort that the cast and crew put into the movies that would be undone. All that money and manpower put into a project just to undo it later on a whim. I feel that this is a dangerous precedent that Days of Future Past sets, and I don't think it's unreasonable to hold this position. But let me also say, I love time travel. I love it as a scientific concept and a plot device in movies. I don't believe that time travel makes for bad movies. I love Back to the Future, and I'm sure I'm not alone on that. Time travel can absolutely work in movies and make for compelling and well-developed stories, but that's not the point of contention. The problem with time travel in movies is that it could be used to retroactively undo the events of previous movies, potentially making all of the effort put into those movies for nothing. Days of Future Past did it first, and I'm quite curious as to which franchise will follow. Now, you might argue, but Lumo, all the X-Men movies before Days of Future Past made money. Fox profited off most of them, and fans still have those movies to watch and enjoy whenever they want to. They weren't all for nothing. To which I'd reply, sure. Those movies still exist for you to enjoy, and yes, the studio made money from them. Those movies released and had an impact on fans in the studio. But keep in mind, if you know that Days of Future Past resets the timeline and would like to go back and watch any of the movies it retcons, you would be watching those movies with the knowledge that none of the events depicted have any gravity to them. Imagine watching X2. At the end of the movie, Jean sacrifices herself. But at the end of Days of Future Past, Jean is alive. And since Cyclops is alive at the same time, it's probably safe to say that Jean never went Dark Phoenix because that was what led her to kill Cyclops. So you're watching Jean sacrifice herself at the end of X2 with the knowledge that she will end up fine later down the line. That seriously devalues her and any other actions that Days of Future Past retcons. You would have to have a major disconnect between what you're watching and what you know about the future of the franchise to go back after Days of Future Past and get the full experience out of the earlier X-Men movies. Let's try applying this idea to a more relevant franchise. As of my recording this video, Avengers Endgame has not released. I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard rumblings that it will include time travel in some capacity. So imagine if Endgame pulls the Days of Future Past on us and retcons a fat chunk of the MCU out of canon. If the remaining Avengers were to travel back to 2012 and change something significant enough in the Battle of New York, for example, most of the MCU would cease to be relevant. Imagine the outrage if the MCU made a retcon that big. Honestly, I don't think they will change anything that significant. The MCU is doing very well financially, and I don't think anyone over there is so unhappy with the franchise that they want to retcon large parts of it, except for Black Panther. But again, the point is that they could do it if they really wanted to. Days of Future Past is proof positive that a multi-million-dollar franchise could decide to retroactively alter the course of its history. Who knows what's next? The DCEU, Star Wars, Fast and Furious, Harry Potter. Actually, J.K. Rowling's already doing that, so never mind. Now, let me take a moment to develop my issue with time travel a bit further. Imagine that 10 or 20 years from now, several other franchises have used time travel to retcon their timelines. Imagine that time travel has essentially lost its weight. It's become so normal that it's not surprising or impactful when characters in a well-established franchise retcon events. At this point in time travel has basically been done to death, and situations similar to Days of Future Past are widespread. At this point, if you were to go into a franchise knowing that time travel is a possibility within its continuity, you would be less likely to value any of the events depicted therein. The actions of the characters, no matter how significant they are at the time, lose their gravity because in the back of your head, you know that any later entry in the franchise could undo any events because it's so normal in the film industry. But that's just a hypothetical that hopefully never comes to fruition. I sincerely hope time travel never becomes that normal in the film industry, and I hope that if more movies start including time travel in their stories, they do it well. I'd hate to see time travel become another maligned movie trope like shaky camera lens flares. That's all I really have to say on the subject, and so now I'd like to open the conversation up to you, the viewer. Give me your thoughts on time travel or Days of Future Past in the comments. Do you think I'm overreacting, or do I have good reason to worry about time travel being used to retcon movies out of relevance? Let me know what you think. Now I want to talk about this format and why I will continue to make this type of video moving forward, opposed to fully scripted, heavily edited video essays or critiques. Basically, I want to talk about a lot of things. I want to start discussions around as many topics as possible, and there are some things I'd like to talk about that aren't suited for video essays. Maybe I don't have enough to say about the subject, or maybe I don't know enough about it. Either way, there are so many discussions I'd like to get started that I can't make a proper video essay for all of them, and that's what this format is for. Moving forward, I'd like to make long-form critiques of the other MCU movies I said were bad in my Black Panther critique. It'd be difficult for me to put out hour-long critiques and video essays on a weekly basis, but hour-long critiques and discussion videos like this one would not be too much at all. I'm probably going to regret saying this later on because I'm essentially holding myself to a standard I might not be able to hold up realistically, but I'm absolutely going to try. Anyway, that about wraps it up for me. Feel free to leave your criticism in the comments, and I'll see you next time.